check this out. BCM right here, bringing you another Commander deck tech, and today we are looking at Tex-Eirinis, Gloomstalker. And this has a very unique thing called a background. This will allow us to play these backgrounds along with this commander, and we're going to be in the Golgari colors. So we're going to use Tex-Eirinis. We're going to use Agent of the Shadow Thieves. With this background, whenever this creature attacks, if no opponent has more life than that player, we get to put a +1 counter on that creature. It'll gain Death Touch and Indestructible until the end of turn. But also, this is kind of like a Lands Matter toolbox type deck. With Tex-Eirinis, anytime it attacks, we get to return any land from our graveyard back to the battlefield. So we're going to have a lot of different synergies with lands entering the battlefield, certain utility lands, stuff like that. So let's get right into this. First up are all the creatures. So we have Titania, Voice of Gaia. This is a 3/4 with reach and has a very good static ability. Whenever one or more lands are put into the graveyard from anywhere, we get to gain 2 life. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if there are 4 or more land cards in our graveyard, and we control and own Titania's Voice and a very specific land named Argoth, Sanctum of Nature, we get to meld them together. And when we do that, it'll meld into Titania, Gaia Incarnate. Its power and toughness are equal to the total number of lands you control. This creature has Vigilance, Reach, Trample, and Haste, so it's a very large, crazy creature. When it enters the battlefield, we get to return every single land from our graveyard back to the battlefield tapped. It also has a very good activated ability where we pay 3 colors, a green, and we put 4 +1 counters on any land, and it becomes a creature. Next, we have Braid's Arisen Nightmare. I absolutely love this card. Every single end step, you can sacrifice an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, a land, or a planeswalker, and if you did, each opponent can sacrifice that permanent of the chosen type, and for each opponent that didn't choose that, they lose 2 life, and you get to draw a card. Next, we have Korlash, Heir to Blackblade. His power and toughness are going to be equal to the total number of swamps you control, and you can pay a colorless and a black, and you get to regenerate Korlash. Next, we have Maga, Traitor to Mortals. This card is absolutely hilarious. It'll enter the battlefield with X +1 counters on it, and when he enters the battlefield, target player will lose life equal to the number of +1 counters on it. That player is going to lose a lot of life. Next, we have Lumra, Bellow of the Woods. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands we control. When he enters the battlefield, we mill 4 cards, then we return all lands from our graveyard back to the battlefield tapped. This is going to be a very good way to put as many lands on the battlefield at one time. Next, we have my personal favorite with Hermit Druid. We're going to be doing a very good job at putting cards into our graveyard. That way we can get them all out on the battlefield at one time, and our opponents really can't mess with that. But with Hermit Druid, you can pay 1 green, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card, and all the other revealed cards are put into your graveyard. Next, we have Elvish Reclaimer. He'll get +2/+2 as long as there's 3 or more land cards in our graveyard. That shouldn't be hard to do. We can pay 2 colors, sacrifice a land, search our library for any land, and put it on the battlefield tapped. He's kind of like a crop rotation. We're going to have a couple different creatures that will allow us to play additional lands or allow us to play them for the graveyard. So we have the iconic Oracle of Moldiah. We can play additional lands on each of our turns. We have to play with the top card of our library revealed, and we can play lands from the top of our library. Now we have a newer one. We have Icetill Explorer. We can play additional land on each of our turns, but we can play lands from our graveyard, and he has landfall, so anytime a land enters the battlefield, he'll trigger. Whenever that happens, we mill a card. Now we have Aftermath Analyst. This is going to be a very good way to return all our lands from our graveyard to the battlefield at one moment. When it enters the battlefield, we do have to mill 3 cards. Then we pay 3 colorless and a green. We sacrifice it. Then we can return all lands from our graveyard back to the battlefield tapped. Now we have Sowing Mycospawn. This is a 3/3 Eldrazi. It has Devoid, so it technically has no color, but it has Kicker as well. When we cast a spell, we search our library for a land card and put it on the battlefield. But if it was cast, then we can exile any land we want. Now we have Horizon Explorer. This has a very good static ability where lands will enter the battlefield untapped. And anytime we attack a player, we get to create a lander token. This is basically kind of like a treasure or a food, but we sacrifice that token, then we can search our library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Now we have some creatures that are either going to take over the game or deal with all of our opponent's stuff. So we have Mossword Dread Knight. This has two different abilities. Apart from being a creature, this has a adventure side, which is called Dread Whispers, which is a colorless and a black for a sorcery. We can draw a card and lose life. We can cast it as a 3/2 creature with trample, and if it would be put into a graveyard, then we can cast the adventure side at the end of our next turn. Similar to that, we have Murderous Rider. It'll be a 2/3 with lifelink, and if it's put into a graveyard, we get to put it at the bottom of its owner's library, or we can pay a colorless and 2 black. We can destroy target creature or planeswalker, and we lose 2 life. Now we have Disciple of Bolas. When it enters the battlefield, we have to sacrifice another creature, and then we gain X life and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power. Now we have Phyrexian Crusader. This one's really fun. It's a 2/2 with first strike, protection from red and white, but it also has Infect. Now we have Karsi Revenant. This is a 3/3 with flying, death touch, and lifelink, but it has a really cool ability called Renew. For 2 colorless and 1 black, we can exile this card from our graveyard and put a flying counter, a death touch counter, and a lifelink counter on any creature. Now we have Termagant Swarm. This has a really cool ability called Ravenous. So when it enters the battlefield, it'll enter with X plus 1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, then we get to draw a card. But it also has Death Frenzy. So when it is put into a graveyard, we're going to create a number of 1/1 Tyrannid tokens where X is Termagant Swarm's power. Now we have Titan of Industry. This is a 7/7 with reach and trample, but when it enters the battlefield, we get 2 different options. We can either destroy target artifact or enchantment, target player gains 5 life, or create a 4/4 Rhino, or we can put a shield counter on target creature we control. Now we have Apex Devastator. This one is absolutely insane. It's a 10 cost 10/10 that we're going to cascade 4 times. And because its mana cost is so high, chances are we're going to hit something very good. Now we have Rampaging Yao Guai. This is a 2/2 with Vigilance and Trample, but it'll enter the battlefield with X counters on it, and when it enters the battlefield, we can destroy any number of targeted artifacts or enchantments with total mana value X or less. Now we have Lifeblood Hydra. Most Hydras are going to be very good in this kind of strategy because we're going to have a lot of mana that we can pay into these creatures and make them very large. And chances are our opponents can't deal with these creatures. But it'll enter the battlefield with X plus 1 counters on it. It has trample. And when it's put into a graveyard, we get to gain life and draw cards equal to its power. Now we have Massacre Worm. I absolutely love Massacre Worm. When it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2, and then has a static effect. Whenever any creature a opponent controls is put into a graveyard, that player will lose 2 life. And we have Uvenwald Hydra. Its power and toughness are going to be equal to the number of lands we control. It has reach, so it can block flyers. And when it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. We do have one planeswalker that's really going to help us out, and that's Karn Liberated. This is kind of on the higher end of the mana cost, but he just does so much work. He'll enter with 6 loyalty counters on him. You can +4 him, and target player has to exile a card from their hand, or you -3, you can exile any permanent. Just get it off the battlefield. And -14, you restart the game with all the non-aura permanents that you exile with Karn. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. There's only 4. So we have Exploration Broodship. This is one of the newer spacecrafts that has station. So we can tap another creature to put charge counters on it, and we get different abilities equal to these charge counters. So if we have +3 charge counters on it, we can play a additional land on each of our turns. That's going to come in very handy. Or if it has +8, every single turn we can cast a permanent spell from our graveyard by sacrificing a land in addition to its other types. Now we have Black Blade Reforged. This is a very good equipment, especially when we're going to have a lot of lands on the battlefield. So the equipped creature will get +1/+1 for each land we control, and if it happens to be a legendary creature, the equip cost is only 3 rather than 7. Now we have Head Shredder. Whenever Head Shredder attacks, we can mill 2 cards, and then whenever one or more land cards are put into our graveyard from our library, we get to put them directly onto the battlefield. This says crew, so it's not a creature until we tap a creature with power of 1 or more. Now we have Lash Writhe. When this enters the battlefield, it'll enter with a germ token already attached to this, because it's called Living Weapon. Quick creature will get +1/+1 for each swamp we control. This has Phyrexian mana for its equip cost, so you could either pay the color that it needs, or you can pay 2 life. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. There's only 4. Either they're going to help remove permanents from our opponents, or allow us to manipulate our lands. So first up, we have Splunking. When this enters the battlefield, we get to draw a card. Then we can put a land card from our hand on the battlefield, and if the land happened to be a cave as its type, we get to gain 4 life. But more importantly, the whole reason is lands will enter the battlefield untapped. Now we have Pernicious Deed. We can pay X, sacrifice Pernicious Deed, then destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with converted mana cost X or less. Now we have Oubliette. When it enters the battlefield, target creature will phase out, and we get to tap that creature. Now we have Binding of the Old Gods. This is a saga, so depending on what chapter we're on, has a different effect. So chapter 1, we get to destroy target non-land permanent a opponent controls. When it gets to chapter 2, we get to search our library specifically for a forest card and put it on the battlefield tapped. And then chapter 3, our creatures will gain Death Touch until the end of turn. Okay, let's get into the instants. Most of these are just going to be ways to put lands on the battlefield, return things back to our hand, or just ultimately deal with what our opponent is doing. So first up, we have Crop Rotation. As an additional cost to cast this, we do have to sacrifice the land, but that's not going to matter because we can get that land back. But we get to search our library for any land and put it on the battlefield. Now we have Realms Uncharted. This is kind of like Fact or Fiction for lands. We get to search our library for 4 land cards with different names. A opponent will choose 2 of them. 2 of them go into our hand. The other go into the graveyard. But because we're going to be able to play lands from our graveyard, this is basically pay 3 mana, go get 4 lands. Now we got a fun one. We have Constant Miss. This has buyback by sacrificing a land. So for 1 colorless and 1 green, creatures will deal no combat damage that turn. And because we're sacrificing a land, that way we always have a way for our opponents not to deal damage to us. Now we got a whole bunch of removal spells. So we have Deadly Rollick. We're going to exile target creature. This would cost 4 mana normally, but if we control our commander, we can cast this without paying its mana cost. Now we have Terra Sunder. This has a alternate casting cost with Kicker. We can exile target artifact or enchantment normally, but if it was kicked, we get to exile target non-land permanent instead. Now we have Vendetta. We're going to destroy target non-black creature, and we lose life equal to that creature's toughness. That's not bad for 1 mana as an instant. Now we have Declaimer. We're going to choose target artifact or enchantment, and its owner will shuffle it into their library. Of course, we have Abrupt Decay. This spell cannot be countered. We're going to destroy target non-land permanent with mana cost 3 or less. Now we have Sudden Death. This is a split second, so as long as this is on the stack, no other player can put anything else onto the stack, but target creature will get -4/-4. Now we got a fun one. We have Saw in Half. We're going to destroy target creature, And if a creature would die this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are exact copies, except their power will be half of its creature's toughness, and its toughness will be half of its power, but we round up each time. Now we have Erebos' Intervention. This one's a really good X spell, so we can either exile up to twice X target cards in graveyards, or target creature will get -X and gain X life. Okay, let's get into the sorceries. Most of these are just removal spells or ways to put as many permanents on the battlefield as possible. Of course, we have Demonic Tutor. We get to search our library for any card and put it into our hand. Now we have Insatiable Avarice. This says Spree, so it's kind of like Kicker. The more mana we pay into this, the more effects we get. If we pay 2 colorless in addition to the black mana, we get to search our library for any card and we put that card on top of our library. Or we can do that and then pay 2 more black mana, and target player will draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. Now we have Illicit Shipment. This has Casualty 3, so when you cast the spell, you can sacrifice a creature with power 3 or greater. If you did, you copy the spell. You get to search your library for any card and put it into our hand. This is like another way to get 2 Demonic Tutors in one spell. Now we have Diabolic Revelation. For 3 colorless, 2 black, and then X, however much mana we pay into it, we get to search our library for up to X cards and put those into our hand. Now we have Hour of Promise. We get to search our library for up to 2 land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. And then if we control 3 or more deserts specifically, we get to create 2/2/2 black zombies. Most of the time this isn't going to matter. We're just searching for any lands and put them straight onto the battlefield. Now we have Balagad Recovery. This is what's called a MDFC, or a modal double face card. So either we can cast it for the Balagad Recovery side, or we can play it as a land. In this case, if you cast Balagad Recovery, you can return any card from your graveyard back to your hand. Now we have Last March of the Ents. This spell cannot be countered. We're going to draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures we control, and then we can put any number of creature cards from our hand on the battlefield. Now we have Genesis Wave. For 3 green and X, we're going to reveal the top X cards and put any number of permanents from among them onto the battlefield, and all the reveal cards that weren't put onto the battlefield are put into our graveyard. Now we have a whole bunch of removal spells. So we have Blight Grenade. We're going to destroy target creature, and then all creatures will get -3/-3. Of course, we have Damnation. We're going to destroy all creatures. They cannot be regenerated. Now we got my personal favorite with Black Sun Zenith. We're going to put X -1 counters on each creature, and then we get to shuffle Black Sun Zenith back into our library. Of course, we have Decree of Pain. We're going to destroy all creatures. They cannot be regenerated, and we get to draw a card for each one destroyed this way. This also has cycling, so if we don't need it right away, we can pay 3 colors and 2 black, discard this, and draw a card. And when we do cycle it, all creatures will get -2/-2. Now we have Gaze of Granite. There are a lot of X spells because we're going to be putting so much land on the battlefield and have access to a lot of mana that all these X spells are actually going to be very beneficial for us. But for 2 black, a green, and then however much mana we pay into it, we're going to destroy each non-land permanent with mana cost X or less. Now we have Exsanguinate. 2 black and X. Each opponent will lose X life, and we gain life equal to the life that was lost this way. So, the more opponents you have, they're going to lose a lot of life. You're going to gain even more. Okay, let's get into the land base. This is a very fun, streamlined land base, and like I said before, most of these lands do enter the battlefield tapped, but we're not going to worry about that too much because we just want the utility of these lands and the sheer amount that we can put onto the battlefield at one time, especially from our graveyard. Of course, we have Command Tower. We have Horizon of Progress. We can pay 1 life to add 1 mana that a land we control could produce. We can pay 3 colors. We can put any land from our hand on the battlefield tapped. Or we can pay 1, sacrifice Horizon of Progress, draw a card. Now we have Talon Gates of Madara. When this enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature will phase out. It'll tap for a colorless mana, or we can pay 1 to add 1 mana of any color, or we can pay 4 colorless to put Gates of Madara from our hand on the battlefield. Of course, we have Verdant Catacombs. That way we can go get any swamp or forest card. So we can go get Overgrown Tomb, Vernal Fen. This will enter tapped unless we control 2 or more basics. We have Festering Thicket. This is cycling, so if we don't need it, we can pay 2 colors and discard it to draw a card. Of course, we have Twilight Mire. We got a check land with Woodland Cemetery. Our Battle Bond land with a Deathcap Blade. Speed land with Blooming Marsh. Now we have Viridescent Bog. We can pay 1 and it'll add a black and a green mana. Of course, we have Wastewood Verge. Now we have Restless Cottage. This will enter the battlefield tapped. It can tap for black or green, or we can pay 2 colors, a black and a green. It'll become a 4/4 black and green horror creature, and whenever that creature attacks, we can exile up to 1 target card from any graveyard, and we create a food token. Of course, we have Urborg. Every land will be a swamp in addition to its other types. It pairs very nicely with Cabal Coffers. For 2 colors, we can add a black mana for each swamp we control. Now we have Minus Mortal, Dark Fortress. This will enter the battlefield tapped. It'll tap for a black mana, or we can pay 3 colors and a black. We can put a shadow counter on target creature, and as long as that creature has a shadow counter, it's a wraith in addition to its other types. Creatures with shadow can only be blocked by creatures with shadow. Now we have the Black Gate. This will enter tapped unless you pay 3 life. It'll tap for a black mana, or you can pay a colorless and a black. You can choose a player with the most life or tied for the most life, and target creature can't be blocked by creatures that player controls that turn. Now we have Evan's Stronghold. This will enter the battlefield tapped. It'll tap for a black mana, or you can sacrifice it to add 2 black mana. Of course, we have Bojuka Bog. That way we can exile our opponent's graveyards if we really need to. Now we have Amudian Hatchery. You can pay 1 life to add 1 black mana and put a hatchling counter on this land. And whenever this land is put into a graveyard, we get a 1/1 black insect token for each counter that was on this land. Now we have Peat Bog. This will enter the battlefield with 2 depletion counters on it. We can remove a depletion counter to add 2 black mana, and then if there's no depletion counters on it, we have to sacrifice it. Now we have Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. Similar to Urborg, each land will be a forest in addition to its other types. Now we have Hickory Woodlot. This will enter the battlefield with 2 depletion counters on it. We can remove a depletion counter to add 2 green mana, and when there's no counters on it, we have to sacrifice it. Now we have Argoth, Sanctum of Nature. This will enter the battlefield tapped unless we control a legendary green creature. We can pay 2 colors and 2 green, create a 2/2 green bear token, then mill 3 cards. This is the land that we're going to meld with Titania, Voice of Gaia. Now we have Avendo, Waking Haven. This will enter the battlefield tapped, but it also has Station. If we have 12 total power, we can pay 1 green and then add 1 green mana for each creature we control. This is kind of like Gaia's Cradle. Now we have Shifting Woodland. This will enter the battlefield tapped unless we control a forest. It'll tap for green mana. This has Delirium, so for 2 colors and 2 green, Shifting Woodland would become a copy of any target permanent in our graveyard, but we have to have 4 or more different card types in our graveyard already. Now we have Havenwood Battleground. This will enter the battlefield tapped. It'll tap for green mana, or we can sacrifice it to add 2 green mana. Now we have Volrath Stronghold. We're going to use this to protect our creatures from our graveyard by putting them on top of our library. That way we can constantly get our creatures back. Now we have Urza's Cave. 3 colors, we can sacrifice Urza's Cave to search our library for any land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Now we have Boseiju, who shelters all. can pay 2 life and add a colorless mana, and if we use that mana on a instant or sorcery, that spell cannot be countered. Of course, we have Strip Mine. That way we can destroy any land we need to. Now we have Tower of the Magistrate. This will add a colorless mana, but we can pay 1 colorless, and then target creature will gain protection from artifacts. Now we have Deserted Temple. We can pay a colorless and untap target land. We have 3 forests and 3 swamps. And that was the Commander deck tech for Tex-Eirinis Gloomstalker. I really hope you guys enjoyed this Lands Matter toolbox type build. This deck is very unique and can basically deal with most things your opponents try to throw at you just by using lands. If you guys have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll leave the link to the Moxfield deck list like always. And until next time, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share these videos, and I'll see you in the next one.